Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jamie.
I'm Justina.
And this is
Just So You Know.
Just so you know, I'm wearing our shirt.
Yeah, we love it.
With our faces on this. And just so you know, today we are talking about some really freaky shit that has to do with hoarding animals. And we're unleashing some truth bombs today.
I want to be bombed with the truth. That's the only bombing I want is truth bombs because I don't like where this is probably going to go.
Okay, well, we can make that happen. Today we have Dan Paden joining us later on in this episode to talk about some of the undercover investigations inside of fake quote-unquote rescue groups that are quote-unquote saving animals but then actually exploiting and abusing them.
Yeah, that's always been my concern whenever I've like rescued a cat. I don't want to say the organization just in case of any reason, but like I always am like, please do the right thing by this cat, because my first thought is like, you have so many animals. Like how I question if I'm doing the right thing bringing them to a rescuing organization, or if I should let them live their life free at the very least on the street. It's so tricky. So I'm excited to learn about some organizations because that's always been my fear.
Well, hopefully this episode can answer some of your questions because we are dealing with a crisis right now.
Yeah.
There are millions and millions of homeless pets and animals that some of them are forced to live on the street in dangerous conditions, getting hit by cars, dealing with weather, getting scooped up by animal abusers, who knows?
Right, and that's the scary part.
There's good-hearted people out there that they want their money to go to something that is helping animals, and they give $5, $10, $20 a month, and they think that they're doing good. But there are some quote-unquote rescue groups out there that are actually hoarding animals.
Horrible.
And keeping them in just, horrific conditions, in cages, covered in feces.
Right.
Just to preface things, guys, this is not to say that every single person that's in the animal rescue world doesn't have good intentions.
Yeah. It's not for everyone, but...
Right. In this episode, we're going to break down how to find a reputable shelter, if you want to help animals, how you can support, or if you want to adopt, where are places that you can go. But before we get there, let's talk about what hoarding is.
Hoarding is my biggest nightmare.
What is it?
It's when you accumulate one too many of anything, and all of a sudden the living conditions are unbearable and often toxic and just not healthy.
Well, it is a mental disorder, and hoarding, actually, my first fact is that hoarding is the #1 animal cruelty crisis facing companion animals in communities throughout our country. That's crazy.
That's really crazy.
And not only that, but this hoarding in terms of animals is fake rescues who dupe the public and hoard animals. And then you have, puppy mills, quote unquote, no-kill shelters. And you have this like animal overpopulation crisis. And this enables this type of hoarding to go on because hoarders will then just take the money.
Right.
And then the dogs and cats are living
suffering
in these abysmal conditions.
I know. It's so sad. And it could have been well intended in the beginning, but things get overwhelming and people lose sight of the individual.
Well, take a guess as to how many individuals this is happening to in our country.
Millions.
250,000 animals, just in the U.S. I'm talking about, are victims of hoarders every year.
Because honestly, like animal cops used to be like my toxic show that I used to be obsessed with when I was younger. My mom used to be like, stop watching this. You are acting wild. So I used to curse and get angry and yell. I'm like, no. Because I used to see animal hoarding situations on Animal Cops. And sometimes there are dead animals on the floor, under a couch, in a box. Because there's so many that those people are just not capable of taking care of all of them. So these hoarding situations, a lot of these animals die.
There's a stat that I have here that 70% of animal hoarding cases include fire hazards, and some fires at hoarding operations that are posing as rescues, they will then collect money, like fundraisers after, and you almost think you're like, did they set the place on fire?
Probably.
And PETA.org, if you go on there and you look up hoarding, like there are pictures of dogs in cages that were burned alive.
No.
Can you imagine? Literally, put yourself in that situation and just think about being trapped in a cage. There's flames all around you. You can't get out. You're barking for help, and then you die. Your lungs are engulfed in the smoke.
Do you want me to cry? I've been doing so well, Jamie. I don't want to cry. That breaks my heart. Anytime I see any type of fire, I know a lot of people will judge me. I think about the animals. I don't think about the humans because they can at least open up a window. A dog, a cat, a bird, the fish, they can't open up the window. No. Or scream for help, you know, and it kills me.
No, and nobody's going to help them. They just die in the fire, and then their bodies are found like burnt and dead.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Shelters try to keep their euthanasia rates low, and this is just a fact. And so what they'll do is when hoarders come along or so-called animal rescues come along and say, we'll take 20 dogs off your hands, the shelters are likely to just give them over, and sometimes they don't look into who they're giving the dogs to. Or cats too. And so
horrible.
So you look at these like save rates, and truly you're not saving an animal by giving them over to a hoarder. You're just
perpetuating the situation. Yeah.
And you got to look at the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that there are way too many animals that exist. We need to up our spay and neuter rates and facilities because right now you have a dog or a cat that's out on the street, and a cat, for example, one unspayed female cat, and it could lead to 370,000 kittens in 7 years.
Oh my God. That's so sad.
On any given day in the U.S., there's an estimated 70 million homeless dogs and cats struggling to survive.
Sadness.
So, you said earlier in the episode, you're like, well, do I just let them be on their own and be outside? And I mean,
it's tricky.
It's really tricky, and I'm going to hear your side of the things, but you also have to recognize that homeless dogs and cats on the street, they oftentimes get hit by cars. They're vulnerable to attacks.
Right.
They can get diseases.
Right.
And depending on where you live, you want to make sure that your companion animal has food at night, has basic care.
For sure. I mean, I say it's tricky just because if it were me, I would rather be homeless on the street, struggling, figuring it out. Hopefully something amazing happens, as opposed to being caged up, locked up. But I don't know, shelters.
Well, in an idyllic world, we wouldn't have animals running around on the streets and having to fend for themselves, because that is a dangerous situation in itself. And I don't necessarily agree with it. And PETA doesn't agree with just having animals to fend for themselves on the street. And PETA does feel that it is more humane to euthanize an animal that might have sickness or disease or behavioral problems than to just let them try and figure it out, or to put them in a hoarding situation case. So let's talk about, Dan's going to really be able to answer the root of the hoarding issue and really answer our questions about this. I do want you to consider this one quote that I came across that I think describes this topic very clearly, which is, you're walking next to a river and you see a kitten floating past. You jump in, you save the kitten, and then another one floats by, and you save that one too. Then another, and another, and another float by. And you soon realize you can't save them all.
Story of my life.
So you run upstream to see who's throwing the kittens into the water, and you stop that person.
And you punch them in the face, 100%. Well, I agree.
I don't know about the punching part, but.
No, that was literally me on my street. Like, I live in the Bronx, and I've rescued, I don't even know how many cats. I have seen many kittens down the river, metaphorically speaking, and have tried to help it. And the root of it is these animals on the street, they could get pregnant.
And you can't save them all, right? And they have to be spayed and neutered. So let's bring on our guest, Dan Paden. He is the Vice President of Evidence Analysis at PETA. And he's going to tell us some real stories and real situations that he's come across.
Hello, you two.
Hey.
Hello.
Nice chat. I love it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Obviously, you see that we both are like we want the same things, but have different opinions about certain things.
That's what makes a healthy chat. Yeah. As you said, I'm a vice president at PETA. I happen to work on our undercover investigations. So I work hand in hand every day with people who are working at slaughterhouses, farms, laboratories, roadside zoos, and occasionally in so-called sham rescue facilities, which, as you were talking about earlier, are these operations that claim to be rescuing and helping animals, but in reality are just a front for someone with a mental illness who's addicted to animals. I came to PETA 22 or so years ago after studying theology. And I was just interested in social justice from a religious perspective. And I realized that advocating for animals, which is something I had been doing just for no other reason other than I had empathy for them, was actually a very Christian thing to do. That's my tradition. And so I asked Ingrid to devote my life to it. And she brought me on board, and here I am.
And what makes this issue of hoarding in particular disturbing? And can you talk about the Isaiah 2, I think it is, ministry case?
Yeah. I think it's most disturbing because these people, for how sick they are, they're very good at misleading the public and often misleading law enforcement into thinking that they're just good intentioned people who maybe need a few more resources or a little bit more help volunteer-wise, and that they're doing a fine thing. And they're very, very good. They're sympathetic characters. They can turn on the tears. They can really convince people that they're just great folks who just are a little bit overwhelmed, but that they're still doing good by animals. So this most recent case of a place called Isaiah Ministry, which is in Indiana, is just another example of an individual. This is a woman named Linda Ozier. She purports to operate a facility where she does both animal rescue and counseling for at-risk youth. She claims to do this based on biblical principles of all things. And she was hoarding scores of animals, from cats and dogs to chickens, turkeys, goats, a mini donkey, you name it. She essentially had a Noah's Ark there. And while neglecting them, while these animals were dying, while she's denying them veterinary care, she's also bringing these at-risk youth onto her property and counseling them in a trailer.
Oh my God.
Where there's skeletal remains outside the door. There's the floor is falling apart. There's electrical hazards that causes fires.
Oh my God.
And the ammonia levels are so high from the cat's accumulated waste that, people's eyes were burning while they were in there.
What a lovely example she's setting for the youth.
Lovely Linda. So, I mean, how is somebody able to get away with this? People are giving her money?
It's crazy.
People are giving her money. Earlier you're talking about, the staff who work in some shelters in the U.S. and how they're maybe not the most motivated folks.
Right.
We found that the sheriff's deputy in this county, and it's a rural county, but he was in over his head. He didn't know how to tackle this. He maybe didn't understand what hoarding was. I think he saw a sympathetic character who...
He had a crush on Linda in middle school.
They were sleeping together.
He looked past all her faults.
She got pregnant. Okay, we're getting carried away.
I don't know. Maybe the prosecutor's investigation will reveal that. We'll see.
Okay.
He was content to take a very hands-off approach. It was just time after time he'd go out and say, "We got a complaint." I don't see any big issues, but this is a publicity issue. This is a PR thing, and you just need to do this or that little thing, and that'll put these naysayers to rest. And instead of recognizing it for obviously a cruelty case, B, a case of an individual herself who's in need probably of psychological counseling and
Definitely.
maybe more treatment.
Did she ever admit to doing anything wrong?
No, and that's one of the things about these hoarders is that they're so divorced from reality
Yeah.
that they can look at an animal who is clearly on death's door with an
Mm-hmm.
eye hanging out of their head or
No.
laboring to breathe and say he's fine, she's fine. They'll bounce back tomorrow. They'll take wet food, they'll mix it with hot water, put it in a syringe, try to force feed the animal and think that,
Oh my
that
God.
there's your miracle, that the animal doesn't need to go to a veterinarian.
Oh
The
my
animal
God.
doesn't maybe need to be considered for humane euthanasia, that somehow they're the salvation, they're the miracle worker, and they're going to bring this animal back from death's door.
That's so true. A lot of these hoarders definitely have a mental issue and they just cannot see their doings. Like I watch hoarding shows and they refuse to see anything that they've been doing as wrong. They have a justification for everything. They're like, well, if I didn't have him, he'd be on the street, and I don't want him to get hit by a car, or I don't want him to get euthanized. I should let him get euthanized. Like they get so defensive and like truly believe that everything is totally fine.
Well, I guess, Dan, why don't you tell us, why is euthanasia maybe better?
I've personally worked on probably about 10 sham rescue cases over the years here, where you have other people, hoarders, who are just masquerading as something else. And we've seen animals in cages, we've seen animals loose who, frankly, their life it's not worth living. They're on death's door, they're in pain, their eyes are sealed shut, their noses are sealed shut with mucus. They have feline AIDS, feline leukemia, things like that. Dogs who are paralyzed, who are wrapped in diapers, who are literally living in their accumulated waste. And this is the so-called life that these individuals are doling out to these animals.
What are they doing with the funds? If they're getting all this money, what have y'all found out that they're actually doing with the funds?
Great question. So, we've submitted complaints in several instances to attorney generals in various states because a lot of these individuals have charitable status. They are taking in donations as a 501c3.
Wow.
Like PETA, like other animal rescue organizations like the Red Cross, for instance. And they're using that money from well-intentioned people who think they're supporting something good for animals to line their own pockets, to take trips, to finance their own lifestyle, to pay for their own needs rather than actually tending to animals. And in one case in New York State, in upstate New York, actually, a woman was shut down by the Attorney General of New York for fraudulent solicitation of donations. In Florida, a man was criminally charged and prosecuted for similar conduct, for advertising himself as giving animals a lifetime home, collecting $100 when the animals dropped off, and then just keeping animals in squalor and essentially pocketing all the funds.
How do you find out about this? How does PETA get involved?
We get complaints from locals, from individuals who, like you were saying in your intro, find an animal or have an animal they can't care for anymore, want to do right by that animal, go online, search for a rescue, and find some operation down the road and think, okay, this is what I can do for this dog or for this cat, and then get there and find out, oh, this is not as it was advertised, and something very wrong is going on here. And then thankfully they call us and we take a look.
Okay, so what you're basically saying is if you have a suspicion or you see something, to call you guys. Is there like a specific number or email that PETA has? Because I want that number. What's the number?
The number is 757-622-PETA, or 757-622-7382. The email address is info@peta.org. We also have a nice form on our website, PETA.org, where it just says report animal cruelty. It gives you a bunch of drop-down menus and you can do your thing. But it's tough, for the average person who doesn't deal with law enforcement and overlapping jurisdictions and who regulates what, to know when you encounter a situation who exactly your first call should be to. And we can always help guide people on that.
Yeah, and also to know what's considered illegal and what's not. Like, there's very little oversight into some of these things.
Yeah, and law enforcement, like in this Indiana case, sometimes it's just a lack of resources, it's a lack of knowledge, sometimes it's just a lack of motivation, and they don't want to be seen as the bad guys coming down on an elderly woman who just has too many cats. And but the reality is that if you don't intervene, you don't get those animals out, this behavior just continues, the animals propagate, and rather than saving 80 animals today, next month you're going to be dealing with 150 animals you need to find placement for. So it's better to just take action as soon as people know about it rather than sit on it, because it's just going to get worse and worse.
So if somebody is looking to surrender their animal or rescue an animal or support a rescue group, what are some steps that they can take to identify if this is a good rescue?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say first and foremost, I think people should support their open admission shelters. These are the government shelters, the so-called pounds that the city or county operates. These are your taxpayer dollars going to fund these things. These are regulated facilities. They do have some oversight. They're not great necessarily, but they're a good starting point. If you're looking at a private entity that's calling itself a rescue, first and foremost, you should ask to visit. A lot of these places will say, "Oh, sorry, can't visit." I mean, that's a huge red flag. If they're not willing to show you, a member of the public, what they're doing and how their animals look like.
Red flag.
So can you tell us the story of a positive rescue or something where, I want to, maybe while people are like grabbing their tissues right now, let's give them a little break and give them something happy.
Yeah. I mean, so Caboodle Ranch is a great example. This was a facility in Florida that I mentioned earlier. This was operated by one man who was at the time in his late 60s or early 70s. He had 5 acres of land in rural Florida. He had 700 cats. And this is a facility that, that they by and large were not caged, which a lot of people would say, oh, okay, good. So the thing with that is that a lot of them had transmissible disease.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of them were not spayed or neutered. So his population was just kind of exploding.
No.
Why did he do that?
And, this started with a complaint that we got from someone who had been there and who was dismayed by what they saw. And we had an investigator work there. We took our evidence to the local sheriff's department and prosecutor, and they got a search warrant. And they went in and they took every last animal he had. And, there were obviously a number who had to be euthanized for reasons of injury and illness. He clearly, one man was not vetting 700 animals responsibly, so there were a lot of diseases.
That's crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
But hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them were then adopted out. So these animals got the chance to find a home and a family that, frankly, they deserved from the start. And that this guy had denied them. And he was charged and he was taken through the criminal justice system, and he was barred from possessing animals, which is
that's good.
Wow.
The key to ending this behavior.
This goes back to, how do we fix this problem?
Right.
And what is the solution, Dan?
What is the freaking solution?
Tell us.
Well, like you said, it's to go upstream, right? And just cut it off the supply where it starts, and that's just spaying and neutering. We have 4 spay-neuter clinics in PETA that go around our part of Virginia and northeastern North Carolina and do free, low-cost sterilization surgeries. I think we've snipped about 160,000 animals now or so, which, obviously the math you referenced earlier, that means probably billions of lives, that are not coming into this world, that doesn't have room for the ones we already have. Right. So, it's just spay and neuter. That's all it is.
And breeders, right? Would you say, like, for people to stop breeding? I know cats, it's more of a specific breed that gets bred more by breeders, but dogs, right?
Yeah. People continue, because they're just, I think, vain themselves, to just want specific breeds, to want designer dogs. Obviously now it's the breathing impaired breeds, the bulldogs and so forth. But it's just, years ago it was Pits. Obviously before that it was, I think, Rotties, and Dobermans. So there's always some breed who happens to be the in thing at the time. And it's a shame because, obviously, these open admission shelters that are doing their best to help as many animals as they can, don't want to turn away people who are looking to surrender animals. And so they do have to euthanize, and then they get demonized in the press for having to do that, when the reality is, they're not the problem. The problem is the people who are intentionally or negligently bringing more animals into this world.
So if people could take action today, what is one thing that you would tell them to do, or somewhere that they could donate to?
The most important thing is to spay and neuter their own animals, and obviously to encourage their friends and family to do it. I think the other important thing is if you suspect anyone of doing anything wrong to an animal at a hoarding situation or elsewhere, to just notify the police. So many of these situations go unreported, and they go on far longer than they have to. And a lot of them can be resolved by one brave person just picking up the phone or writing an email and blowing the whistle on what they know.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I know it's probably not easy to be looking through this horrific footage, but because of people like you, we're able to see the reality of the situation and change accordingly.
Well, thank you for everything you guys do for animals and for sharing all this great work with others.
Of course. Wouldn't be here without y'all.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dan. We'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. Based on the math and the statistics of the situation, the reality is that we want to try to reduce suffering
for sure
to as far as is practically possible, because unfortunately, it's like that quote. It's just, you cannot save everybody. We just don't have the resources to do that. And we need to go to the root of the problem. And that's kind of what PETA is doing, and that's what people like Dan are doing. And we as human beings that are sometimes determining these animals' fate, we need to look further into these quote-unquote rescue groups or hoarders and not fund that.
Yeah, I've never given money to rescuing organizations, but I have given them animals.
And I think after this episode, I hope you guys are thinking about how maybe we shouldn't be demonizing the general admission shelters after all, that maybe they actually are taking in some of the cases that nobody else wants to take in. And, as we said, it's not like the animal just vanishes. The people will release them on the street or give them to hoarders, or who knows where they'll end up.
We did this. And so it's our responsibility. It's all of our problem, because
I think
it wouldn't exist without
stricter laws on breeding need to be implemented.
It should
be illegal to breed any dogs into existence.
Right.
First of all, why are you taking a male dog's semen? Like, that's just weird to begin with. Like, you're jerking him off.
Very weird industry to be a part of.
Totally. Well, we really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this episode. I know it's a little bit of a complex topic, but it is important as animal lovers, as people that want to do good by animals, to really look into where our money's going and what we're supporting.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thanks guys so much. You know where to find me. I'm at It's Jamie's Corner.
I'm at Justina.Justina.
You can follow our podcast, Just So You Know Podcast, on Instagram and all other sorts of places. And go follow PETA. Go to PETA.org and learn more about this issue.
Yes, please comment and let us know what you thought about this episode, what you want to see us talk about more. Share it, because we need y'all to share these topics to people. Whatever subject rings a bell for you, send it to those people that need to hear that specific message.
And you guys know the drill. We'll be back.
We'll be back.
We'll be back. We'll be back. We'll be back. We'll be back.